my name is Erin Wendt. I'm with the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources within the Floodplain Management Division. And I believe Anna will be kicking us off.
Like Erin mentioned, I'm Anna Christ. I'm a NFIP and outreach specialist here at the department. Erin and I do a very similar job. We reach out with communities to help with their flood insurance ordinance or flood management ordinance, help with the National Flood Insurance Program, just doing general outreach and presentations. So this is our first time doing this presentation. So again, bear with us, but hopefully it is informative for you guys. We are going to be going over the concept of violations in the National Flood Insurance Program and different routes you can take to move towards fixing that violation and different enforcement. And I think that brings us to we'll do our quick overview of our agenda quick. So we'll do introduction of what violations in the National Flood Insurance are, how to identify potential violations and verify if they're real violations that need attending to, different strategies for moving towards compliance, how to achieve compliance, and how to prevent violations from occurring in the future. And then kind of what happens if your community is non-compliant with the NFIP, and then just some general key takeaways.
So that brings us to our first topic, which is just introducing violations as a whole. So in this section, we'll kind of discuss kind of what is defined as a violation, what are some common violations you will see, and then why you should care, why it's important to understand what these are and remedy them. So to start, the definition. So according to FEMA, a violation is the failure of a structure or other development to be fully compliant with the community's floodplain management regulations. So this can be when a structure or other development doesn't have compliance documentation or certifications or other evidence of compliance, and it will be presumed to be in violation until those documents are provided or it is remedied. So furthermore, to remedy a violation, according to FEMA, is that it is brought into full or partial compliance with state or local regulations, or if compliance is not possible, reduce the impacts of its non-compliance. So some impact reduction remedies or options include protecting the structure or development from flood damages. So this could be elevating service utilities. If it's possible to elevate the first floor, elevate the first floor. A big one is implementing the enforcement procedures of your ordinance. This will help ensure that other future similar violations are less likely to occur because your community members will understand that you take these regulations seriously. And then reducing federal financial exposure to the structure or development. So reducing the federal financial exposure could be, the structure might be uninsurable in the NFIP, or they might be ineligible for certain federal grants and such. This is just because FEMA likes to encourage compliance with regulations, and having this money unavailable to non-compliant structures just reinforces that. So your typical violations. So like I mentioned earlier, what are we going to see here? So typical violations you're going to see are either unpermitted development within your special flood hazard area or permitted development that's not following the permit that you granted. So when it comes to unpermitted development, that's exactly what it sounds like. It is the failure of the property owner or developer to obtain or return the floodplain development permit. This could also be the property owner or developer. They obtained the permit, they returned it, but you haven't approved it yet, and they started work on it. When it comes to permitted development that's not following the permit, This could include things such as the developer failed to elevate or flood-proof to the required protection level, and in the state of Nebraska, that's at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation. They could be doing additional work that's not outlined on the approved permit. So this is like they could have come in for a permit to do some earthwork, and then next thing you know, they're putting a structure on that earthwork. That's additional work that wasn't outlined on the permit you approved for them. And then they could also just fail to return compliance documentation. So this could be things such as elevation certificates, floodproofing certificates, that kind of thing. Just any sort of proof of compliance that they didn't end up returning is considered a violation. Your enforcement authority. So in the state of Nebraska, this is going to be it's going to be the Nebraska Revised Statutes, Section 31-1019. This is where it outlines that floodplain management regulations are adopted and enforced at the local level. This is a local responsibility. This also outlines that we at the Department of Natural Resources do not have enforcement authority, but we can provide assistance and guidance on violations and enforcements and such. Another piece of enforcement authority you're going to want to keep in mind is your local floodplain management ordinance. This is going to be kind of the backbone of your floodplain management program. If you used our 2017 state model, this will be section 4.8, talking about enforcement procedures and such. And in our new 2025 model ordinance, this is going to be in section 7. We are still awaiting a release date for this, but hopefully in the next coming months we'll have this new ordinance available. But your local ordinance is going to be really what you need to know about what you can do when it comes to enforcement and violations. So why should you care? There's a variety of reasons of why you as the floodplain administrator should care. So the big thing is enforcing NFIP standards is your job as the floodplain administrator, and it's necessary to remain in good standing with the NFIP. A failure to enforce your regulations can jeopardize your standing in the NFIP, and that could lead to probation and suspension from the program. And we'll talk a little bit more about what probation and suspension means later in the presentation, but just keep that in mind. Additionally, if the property owner or developer doesn't have a permit, they won't have guidance on how to build safely, and this could endanger themselves or others in the area, and it would put the development and those potentially living, if it's in a home or something, a potential loss of life and property. And furthermore, property owners or the community could be found liable if there are damages caused by unacceptable amounts of floodwater rise. So during the permitting process, one of the required documentations is a rise determination. So depending on the flood zone you're in, it's going to differ depending on that, but it's important to note that most developments in the floodplain are going to have some impact on the ways that floodwaters flow. This is simply because you're making a change to the area and it's going to lead to an obstruction and divert the floodwaters. And having a determination of rise provides insights to these impacts, and there's a due process where if a certain amount of rise is anticipated, you can notify neighboring properties and such to inform them of this potential change. But if that step is missed, the property owner or community could be liable for any damages, court fees, etc., that comes about impacting neighboring properties that weren't notified. And again, these determinations are going to be discussed and determined during the permitting process, so there's certain steps to follow when it comes to that. Again, developing without permits, there are the potential to be violating federal law regarding any wetland protection or endangered species. Oftentimes, floodplains are often homes to wetlands, and wetlands are often homes to endangered species. So making sure you're familiar with the Game and Parks Commission and the U.S. Wildlife Service and their permitting regulations, as well as their inventories showing where wetlands are or endangered species are, can help understand what other permits might be necessary when it comes to developing in these areas. Now, we touched on this a little bit before, but it's important to care because it could threaten your community standing within the National Flood Insurance Program. So when it comes to violations and enforcement, if FEMA determines that the community is out of compliance, and this will happen when it's also shown that your community is not doing anything to enforce your regulations. So if you're making good faith efforts, this probably won't happen, but if you are just letting it be and not attempting to enforce your regulations, it could result in removal from the National Flood Insurance Program. And a removal from the program would result in a loss of flood insurance coverage for all community members in your jurisdiction, and the community and citizens would become ineligible for most types of federal disaster assistance. So for the property owner, it's important to note that violations often constitute as a misdemeanor offense. And so the typical route of going about this would be you would notify the property owner in writing, and we'll go more into what that'll look like later. And you'll give them a time frame for an actionable step to take place. And after that time period expires, if they haven't made an attempt or corrected or done that first action you laid out, they could then be charged with a misdemeanor and a daily fine, which will be established in your local ordinance. Additionally, the property owner could see a substantial increase in flood insurance premiums. So flood insurance premiums are calculated with a variety of variables, but these include things such as the first floor height, the elevation of servicing equipment, installation of flood openings, and all that kind of thing. And so if they tend to have these elevations below the base flood elevation, they would have a higher flood insurance premium than neighboring properties that are in compliance with local regulations.
All right. So next we'll move on to how to identify potential violations and how to verify if they're actual violations within your jurisdiction. So we will start with tips on how to identify potential violations. First, we'll start by, it's important to know your boundaries of your floodplain and the boundaries of where your jurisdiction is. So the easiest way to do this is by using the interactive map that's available on our website. You can go on, it will show you the boundaries of your floodplain, your community boundaries. If those ever look incorrect, you can let us know and send us updated boundaries and we'll get that fixed for you. But you can see different types of structures that are within your floodplain. We have different images throughout the years, so you can compare when new structures are put up, everything like that, so you are super familiar with your community and your floodplain. Also, if you're able to periodically visit the area, if you're managing larger areas, it may not be feasible to cover that large of area. But if it is, it doesn't hurt to drive around every once in a while, see if you notice any new structures or new developments pop up within your jurisdiction. And then knowing what houses, businesses exist within your floodplain, knowing if you have any grandfathered structures that may not be compliant currently with your floodplain ordinance. So in the event of any type of disaster, you know that you have to specifically check in with that property. So you know what kind of permits need to be put in place before any sort of repair or improvement can be done on the structure. learning about past flooding events, so you know what kind of damage is typical for your area, what you need to look out for when you're doing any type of inspections. And then just generally talking with your community members about their experiences, what they've had to deal with in the past, if they've noticed any type of development going on within their community, if they've heard anything about any intentions of development going on within the floodplain. Just being connected with your community is going to be one of the best ways to get information about what's going on. So once you've identified a potential violation, the steps to go about verifying that violation first would be fact-finding. So you need to determine if and how the development is in violation of your floodplain management ordinance, whether that's it was put up without a permit, it's not elevated to the proper height, or there's improper floodproofing measurements. Your first step is going to be determining how it's a violation. Once you have that, you're going to want to start collecting evidence. This is typically in the form of photos or written correspondence, but you want to make sure you're keeping a good log of correspondence so you have all of that documentation. That's the biggest thing when dealing with violations, is you want to document everything. If you're using your phone to take pictures, please keep in mind that your phone could be subpoenaed at any point when dealing with a violation, which includes all of the pictures on your phone. So it's important to use either a company camera or a different phone when you're taking pictures related to violations at work. With these pictures, you want to make sure that you have the date and time logged, the location of the photo, a directional point on where the photo is taking, which we'll get into on the next slide, and then just any other information that could be useful when analyzing the photo. So again, with evidence collection, ensure that you are clearly showing the violation and where it's established on the property. So with these two photos, the top picture is the violating structure. It's kind of hard to identify and locate where it is on the property with a close-up photo like that. So an accompanying photo like the one on the bottom shows where it is in relation to the property, and it's easily identified. So once you've determined that it's a violation, you've collected some evidence, the next thing you're going to want to do is send out a notice of violation letter or notice of noncompliance to the property owner. This is your first major step in documenting correspondence with the property owner. It's a starting point if you haven't involved your local legal counsel. This is a good point to do so, as they can help provide direction on the enforcement procedures, review the correspondence before it goes out. If they have any other suggestions or changes, things that they think needs to be included in the letter, you can add that. And find relevant statutes and regulation references so you have references to back up your claims for the violation. We have this template notice of violation letter on our website that you're more than welcome to use. It's all laid out. You just would have to go in and fill out the information that relates specifically to your violation.
Thank you.
So with this violation notice, it should include a description of the development, so where it's located, what type of development it is, if you have information on when the development was constructed. It should explain how it's a violation, reference the regulations that the development is violating, and next actionable steps that the property owner should take to address the violation and move towards compliance, and then a time frame for that response. You also want to include your contact information. In most situations, the first actionable step when dealing with a violation is just to get the property owner to contact you and have a conversation about what needs to be done and what the expectations are. So as we mentioned, this is the first step in dealing with that. Document all correspondence, and we recommend just doing this. You can also include information on what will happen if the violation is not resolved. Like we said, it can lead to suspension, probation, removal of your community from the NFIP, and you can also include information on any penalties that are listed within your ordinance as a result of a violation.
All right, so this is bringing us to our next section, which is strategies for compliance. So this is going to include a wide range of strategies that you may be able to implement to get a violation into compliance with your regulations. So first things first, just understand that violations happen and they're often due to miscommunication and misunderstandings, because sometimes the property owner and other community members just may not know of the requirement for getting a floodplain development permit, or they just don't know where the floodplain is in your community in general. So just understand that it's sometimes just simply due to misunderstandings. And like we've made note of, addressing any violation starts with notifying the property owner. So just let them know that they're non-compliant with your regulations, and give them a step to take to work towards compliance. And like we mentioned earlier, violations need to be resolved to what is considered the maximum extent possible. And this includes correcting any administrative deficiencies. So, administrative deficiencies could be any permitting or documentation errors in your office that resulted in not having the proper documents and such. One thing we want to make note of is you can work with us for assistance throughout this process. We are here to help you with all things floodplain management related, and that includes providing guidance and assistance on enforcing your ordinance. So, like Anna made note of, the notice of violation letter should hopefully start a conversation with the property owner about next steps. And if it's one of those things where they're able to come into your office and have a conversation about it, it's important that you know your ordinance, know your enforcement procedures within your ordinance, so you can talk through this with them, and any compliance steps that they need to do. And another thing that's important to note is make sure you listen with the intent to hear them, not just respond. Sometimes these property owners might be defensive, trying to explain their case. Make sure that they understand that you are listening to them and hearing them, but you still need to make sure that the structure gets brought into compliance somehow. So again, discuss more about what they can do to bring it into compliance. So you can bring points back from the notice letter you sent them and create an actionable next step for them with some sort of deadline. It doesn't have to be like a hard deadline, but just something that you expect by a certain time, and then have regular check-ins with them to get updates on the progress of bringing this development into compliance. And again, this is going to be something that we hit a lot. The overall goal of working with the property owner or developer is to bring it into compliance, because an incompliant structure is a safe structure. So if you have a meeting with the property owner in your office, you're going to want to explain the benefits of complying with local floodplain management regulations with the property owner or developer. And a big ones to hit will be talking about how the home or structure is going to be more protected from flooding, and that's going to impact personal safety and how quickly they can recover post-disaster. Having that not extra protection, but like the regulations are in place for a reason, and the regulations are in place to protect from the loss of life and property. And having that protection from loss of life and property means a quicker recovery post-disaster. And that's super important when it comes to the recovery of a community as well. Additionally, having the structure, whether it's a home or business, having it be in compliance with local regulations will mean it has a better resale value because it is in compliance with local regulations. Additionally, reduced flood insurance costs is a main benefit of having an in compliance structure because like I mentioned earlier, flood insurance costs and premiums are based on a variety of factors, but those that are in compliance with local regulations tend to have lower premium costs than those that are non-compliant. However, if those soft tactics don't work that we just discussed, and the property owner is still non-compliant or they don't want to resolve the issue, legal action might need to be pursued. And so common legal actions include things like fines, stop work orders, temporary injunctions or restraining orders, cease and desist orders. But the big thing that we want you to walk away with here is talk to your legal counsel. They will help you understand the authorities that are available to your community under your local ordinances. And we highly recommend you establish that relationship before a violation comes up. Having that working relationship will make resolving a violation much more smooth. Other actions that might be available to your community is withholding an occupancy permit or a certificate of compliance from the structure. You could potentially refuse to turn on power or water, or you could also put a notice on the title or deed. This notice won't prohibit the sale of the structure, but it will notify those looking into purchasing it that it is a non-compliant structure, and it might sway their decision, I guess. But again, talk to your legal counsel and talk to them now so you have that working relationship and you understand what is available to you when something like this comes up. Now, a final effort that may be used is called a Section 1316 from FEMA. So this is used when all other efforts for compliance have failed. You have run through all possible compliance efforts granted to you by local ordinances, and the structure or property owner is still unwilling to resolve the issue. So a Section 1316 is a request to FEMA to deny federal flood insurance and other services to the violation in property of your, or to the property in violation of your regulations. So this means that it will be uninsurable, it will be unavailable for any federal disaster assistance that may come to your community, and no other grants or loans from federal agencies will be available for any kind of work to the structure. And again, this is something that is used when all other efforts for compliance have failed.
All right. So I will be moving into
how to achieve compliance.
How to achieve compliance with your specific violation. So, next slide. Okay, so achieving compliance with the violations is very dependent on the type of development, what flood zone it's in, and what the violation specifically is. In certain instances, it could be as simple as issuing permits that were either not obtained or incorrect. gathering proper supplemental documentation. So if there was a structure that was built in the floodplain, they didn't receive a permit, you can go back and BAP permit. And if they did build to the correct elevation or standards within your ordinance, just gathering that documentation that shows that could be all that's needed to achieve compliance in that situation. For other situations, it may require actual physical work on the development. If they weren't built to the correct elevation, it could mean elevating the structure, relocating the structure, or adding flood-proofing measures like installing flood openings or dry flood-proofing the structure, depending on what type of structure it is and what is needed in that situation. But the biggest thing is to lean on Nebraska DNR for guidance. We don't expect you to know what every situation will need in order to achieve compliance. And again, we aren't an enforcement authority, so you aren't going to get in trouble just by letting us know that there's a violation and asking for help. As long as you're asking for help, we are willing to give it and everything will be just fine. So actions to take, as we mentioned, FEMA's expectation for fixing a violation is to correct it to the maximum extent practicable and to fully correct any administrative deficiencies so that the violation is less likely to happen in the future. So these actions could be floodproofing, relocating, elevating, or demolishing a structure. It could be protecting, elevating, or relocating the specific utilities. If the structure itself was built into compliance, but the utilities weren't elevated or are located in the wrong area, it could just be as simple as that. It could be making lower levels uninhabitable. In some instances, this could just be filling in a basement. You could prohibit further improvements on a structure in certain instances with substantial damage or improvements. If a structure is substantially damaged, making sure that no further improvements are able to be done on the house until the structure is either brought into compliance or they get the proper permits. And then, like Aaron mentioned before, recording the violation on our deed or title so that the violation is passed on to whoever wants to buy the structure before, just so that everybody is aware of the violation. In the sense of floodproofing, non-residential structures can be dry flood proofed depending on to your community's protection elevation. So in Nebraska, we require a 1 foot above BFE. Your specific community might have a higher regulation than that. So that's why it's important to know your floodplain ordinance. Crawl spaces or garages, spaces below lowest floor could potentially be wet flood proofed as well. So putting in flood vents. And in some situations, agricultural structures could be wet flood proofed with a variance. That's optional language that can be included in your community's floodplain ordinance. So just knowing what regulations are laid out within your ordinance so you know what options you have towards compliance. With structures, you have the option for relocation, physically moving this structure out of the floodplain or the floodway. In Nebraska, residential structures are prohibited in the floodway, so that's an option for moving towards compliance. But it's important to review property boundaries for possible relocation options to see if that's a viable option for compliance. Elevating the structure. Elevating the lowest floor depending on your community's flood protection elevation. So at minimum 1 foot above BFE or whatever is laid out within your community's ordinance. You can achieve this by either physically lifting the structure up with hydraulic jacks, or it can be achieved by filling in the floors below BFE. FEMA does have a technical bulletin to help with the logistics of how to elevate your flood-prone structure. And then demolition. If compliance can't be achieved any other way, this is a feasible option for bringing the community into compliance. But you want to make sure that a timeline is given for when demolition needs to be completed, so it's not years down the line and no action has occurred. And sometimes this can be the most cost-effective resolution. So something to consider. So working with difficult developers, this is probably one of the toughest issues when dealing with violations. People aren't always going to be happy when you bring up a violation and tell them that it needs to be fixed. So it's important to help them understand the National Flood Insurance Program, the regulations, and your responsibilities as a floodplain administrator. If they understand what your job is and where you're coming from, they may be a little bit more understanding with the situation. And then if you provide an itemized actionable list of next steps with deadlines, that can help get the ball rolling towards compliance instead of people dragging their feet on the situation. Answering their questions, being their guide, but don't always expect to make them happy. So it's important that you're available to answer the questions, give them resources, give them materials and references, but understand that it's probably going to be a difficult situation. These are people's homes, livelihoods. It's going to be a difficult situation no matter what. And it's important to never sign anything on good faith or because they're in a rush. Make sure you have all of the information that you need or feel comfortable with to ensure that the project or the situation is getting handled in the correct way, and all of the proper documents have been acquired before you move on to next steps. So if possible, demonstrate the regulations that have been enforced in the past. If you have examples of past enforcement actions, and it doesn't have to be with just situations that have happened within the floodplain, it could be anywhere within your jurisdiction, you can reference those. It helps give a little bit of background on the issue, and it helps indicate that the community is exercising fairness. They're not just singling out a single property owner. There are regulations that the entire community has to follow. And then asking them about alternative building options or locations, giving options to the developer or the property owner so they can kind of determine what the best course of action may be and the best feasible option for them.
Our next section is how to prevent violations. So this is just going to be some tips and tricks and just things to keep in mind to work with your community to prevent violations from starting in the first place. So best practices. So the biggest one that you really need to know is let your community members know of the requirement of a floodplain development permit. Like we mentioned earlier, violations are sometimes the result of misunderstandings or miscommunications, and that stems from community members just not knowing the requirement for a floodplain development permit. Furthermore, if other offices in your community do other related zoning permits, ask to review those as well. So you can check for any kind of floodplain concerns to inform the other offices that they need to come to you for more compliance stuff. Additionally, we made mention of this earlier, but make sure you have the full scope of work when permitting development. Sometimes community members or developers will come in and only get a permit for a part of the work they're planning and assume that it covers the entirety of the work. You need to make sure you have the full scope when permitting development. And then you want to make sure you have clear instructions for permit requirements available for community members to see. So this can include having stuff posted on your website about floodplain regulations and permit applications, or if you don't have a website, you can post it in your office or other high traffic areas in the community. And you want to make sure you include your contact information so community members, if they have questions related to floodplain management stuff, they can come to you and ask. Furthermore, if more of your community members are aware of where your floodplain is and the National Flood Insurance Program, they can assist you in finding potential violations by notifying you of when they see work going on in the floodplain. So this is why it's important that you're informing your community and the public about the National Flood Insurance Program and the and the location of your floodplain. Now, there's a variety of different ways that you can inform your community of the National Flood Insurance Program. This can be through flyers, newspaper listings, mailers, whatever works best for your community in portraying information. We recommend you go that route. You can also give a presentation to your governing body. Let your board know of the National Flood Insurance Program, your floodplain, where it is, the regulations and such. Oftentimes, word of mouth communication can spread faster than physical postings, so because people talk. And so if you just let as many people know of the floodplain and NFIP requirements, they'll tell other people and the word will spread. If and when you decide to present on this kind of information to your community leadership, we recommend that you explain your community's participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. Let them know when you joined the program, how many insurance policies you have you received any federal disaster assistance or grants before? These insurance policies and disaster assistance grants are dependent on being in good standing in the National Flood Insurance Program. So this would be a way to let them know of the importance of staying in good standing. You would also want to explain your position and the responsibilities as the floodplain administrator. A big one is also just providing your floodplain maps. You can use either your, official flood insurance rate map panels that you were given by FEMA, or you can use our interactive map to show off your floodplain and community boundaries and such. You can also invite us at the department to help talk to your board. We have come to board meetings before to talk to board members about the National Flood Insurance Program and the importance of the program and enforcing these regulations. So if you would like us to help out with that, please feel free to reach out. Additionally, we recommend building just kind of a network of floodplain managers. You have a connection with a lot of the regular developers and surveyors and such in your community. So then if they see or get a bid to work in a certain area and they're aware that it's in the floodplain, they know to come to you when it comes to actually developing on that land. This can also include any realtors in the area, assessor's office, emergency managers, and then any others that you can think of that would be helpful in having in this network. We do have a question, so I'll pause real quick. From Sherry, where do you find out how many insurance policies our county has? I'm not sure if that is something that you individually can find out, but we at the Department of Natural Resources have access to a FEMA site that lists how many insurance policies are within certain communities and jurisdictions. So if you're interested to know how many insurance policies you have in your community, you can reach out to us and we can provide that number. It's pretty broad. It doesn't include specific property details. It's just the number of policies. All right. So additionally, good things to know for preventing any violations is just know your responsibilities as the floodplain administrator. Review your ordinance fairly regularly. You don't have to have it memorized, but know where it is and know the general outlines of your responsibilities and roles, and be familiar with those. You could also establish a set procedure for reviewing any projects that may impact your floodplain and having steps for how to permit that kind of stuff. And then you can also look through our welcome guide we have created for floodplain administrators. We also have a whole host of other resources on our digital desk reference that will help you in your role as a floodplain administrator. So, other ways to prevent violations is using the tools available to you. And one of the tools that we would like to highlight is our interactive map on our website. This will take you to our homepage. And there's a couple different ways you can get to our floodplain management page. You can either hover over the services tab and go over to floodplain management, or you can scroll down on this homepage and we're this middle tile here with floodplain management. So on our main floodplain management page, you'll first run into this community floodplain administrator information. This is something that we like to highlight because it has the floodplain administrator information for everyone in the state, broken down by county level. So if you have a question about floodplain management related stuff and you don't necessarily want to come to us at the state yet, you can find your county. I'll just click on a random one, and then it'll give the information for the floodplain administrators within the county, and you can ask a neighboring county if you want to start there before coming to us at the state. But if you scroll past this community floodplain administrator information, you'll come down to some more information, and we'll come over to our digital desk reference later to show you some of the resources there, but we'll start with our interactive maps. So we have quite a lot of interactive maps, but we're going to specifically look at the floodplain interactive map here in the top left. So we'll start out, it comes up with this disclaimer page. You can just hit continue. And then you've got the outline of the state of Nebraska here. And then there's a couple different ways you can go about getting to a community. You can either scroll with your mouse to a certain place, and then you can obviously drag and move if needed, or you can search in this top section. Let's go to Grand Island for this demonstration. So sometimes when you search for a community, it still looks like this and you don't really see the floodplain boundaries yet. You would just need to scroll in a little bit further and then the boundaries will pop up. So what we like to highlight specifically for violation prevention is on this map layers tab. It looks like the 3 pieces of paper stacked on top of each other. This community boundaries layer we want to highlight that because it shows jurisdictional boundaries for all the communities in Nebraska. It'll include the corporate limits of the village or city, as well as the extraterritorial jurisdiction. So for floodplain management related purposes, your zoning regulations or simply just floodplain regulations extend into your ETJ. So knowing what the limits of your boundaries are outside of the main corporate limits is important to note, because you will be responsible for regulating floodplain development in that area as well. We also want to make note of the imagery layers. So if you go over to this 4-panel icon, you'll have imagery layers pop up. So what you can do here is you can cycle through different years of imagery. And if you notice something pop up in a certain area that you don't remember permitting, you can kind of gauge kind of when it showed up. I also like to use Google Earth for this, as it sometimes has more years to choose from, but this is something that we highlight on our interactive map as well. For other permit further violation stuff, you have the option of a few different things. So you can use this measurement tool. And so this deals with even just when you're permitting and such, you would have like a general idea of kind of where the property owner wants to put something up, and you can place a point on the map and measure how far away it is from something. So if someone wants to put something here, you can let them know that, like, hey, you're only 1/10 of a mile away from the floodplain. Maybe you want to do we recommend doing some protection measures, even if it's not required. Or you can also measure how many acres something is. So if they have like a certain plot of land, you can tell them where in that particular plot, if it falls within, your floodplain. You can also change the measurement. What's the word I'm looking for? Unit, the measurement unit. So you can do acres, square miles, kilometers. Even with the measurement, you can do miles, feet, kilometers, whatnot. We also want to highlight under on my laptop, it's these 3 bars for the more items. You can do this draw feature. And so what you can do is you could place points somewhere on the map. You can choose different icons as well. And you can just put a flag or a circle or square or something. And then you can even draw a circle by clicking and holding on your mouse. Or you can, I like to use this circle and make it opaque. And then you can click and drag, and it'll make a circle you can kind of see through. And you can use that to like highlight specific areas to look at. And once you have, if you want to mark up the map, you can, or you can leave it clean. You can print a PDF of the interactive map. So this little print icon, you can, let's hope it works. It's a little slow sometimes. You can create a PDF map of a certain area on our interactive map, and you can use that to present to your board. So it'll be this lighter shaded area is what will be printed. So you'll orient it to wherever you want it to be. And then you can add any notes that you want. So you can say the address, what the structure is you're looking at, the violation, whatever you want, you can put in this little notes section. And then once you hit print, it'll generate a print. Now, I'm not sure, sometimes it takes a few minutes, as it says here in the little disclaimer. So I have one pre-made up, just so you can see what the PDF map will look like. So as you can see, I marked it up a little bit with this red circle and the green shape. But you can see that includes a legend on the side showing what the different colors mean. So it's got the 1% annual chance, the regulatory floodway, the 0.2% annual chance, all the different flood zones that you might see on our interactive map. It has a little inset map as well to give a little context as to where it is. You got your notes section down here as well. And then it'll also include a date printed down at the bottom, just so they know when you pulled this information. Other things that you can make note of on the interactive map is the BFE determinations. So this is your base flood elevation determinations. So they will show up as yellow boxes. Let's see if I can find one. Oh, right here. So these are BFE determinations. So if you are a community that only has Zone A floodplains, you can contact us at the department and we will create a BFE determination map. So then you can provide that to developers at time of permitting so they know what to build to. So let's look at one for an example. So you can just click anywhere on the map and then cycle through with these arrows, and it'll say whether it's a valid determination or not. And then what you can do is, I can't view that one. Well, I apologize. It'll create a map similar to the one we have here, where it has the floodplain, but then there'll be lines showing up for the base flood elevation. And you will interpolate between those as the floodplain administrator and let them know what the required base flood elevation determination is. You can also request BFEs from the interactive map as well. So if you just select a section, you can have this request a BFE determination. So you as the floodplain administrator can request these. It will have you log in. And if you don't know your login information, talk to Michelle. She can help you out with that. All right, real quick, before we move back to the presentation, I just want to highlight some more resources that will help you prevent violations and just know your role as the floodplain administrator. So if you go to our digital desk reference, again, you can either hover over services and go down to digital desk reference, or on our main DNR homepage, it's right here. And then this just has a bunch of guidance documents and such. So you've got, this will be where you could find model permit applications, no rise certifications, or less than 1 foot rise documents. You will find FEMA technical bulletins here. Here's a whole section talking about violations and enforcement stuff. We just highly recommend coming to our interactive map and taking a look at what all we have available. And if you have any questions when it comes to navigating our website, feel free to reach out and we will help find those things for you.
Perfect. Before I get into the next section on community noncompliance, I just want to reiterate that the best way to prevent violations within your community is to inform your community members. So reaching out to the public, letting them know who you are, what you do, so they know that they need to contact you with these different situations including the floodplain. On our website, there are a ton of different outreach materials, but if you have any ideas for outreach materials that would benefit you and your community that you would like us to provide, let us know, and we're more than happy to explore creating that option for you. So we're going to talk about what happens when your community isn't enforcing your floodplain regulations and fixing the violations that have come up. So this is community non-compliance. So what happens if a community fails to resolve violations to the best of their ability? FEMA may take enforcement action against the community. So this threatens your standing in the NFIP, which has its own consequences for a property owner in your jurisdiction. But again, this isn't going to happen unless you stop working with us to fix the issues that are at hand in your community. So as long as you are working with us at the department, you should not be at risk of any enforcement actions with FEMA. So again, avoid this by working with us. We do not have enforcement authority. We are not going to kick you out of the program. We won't push the violation up towards FEMA until it gets to the point where you're no longer working with us. At that point, if we should get there, a determination of noncompliance will be moved on to FEMA, but it won't be done after multiple attempts from us to provide assistance. You're going to get a notice of this before any sort of enforcement action happens. So it's not just going to happen randomly. There's going to be multiple attempts from us to avoid that issue. We don't want any communities to have open violations or enforcement actions from FEMA. We want to make sure the matter gets completed to the highest extent that we can. So it's not going to be sprung on you. You're going to have multiple notices before anything like that were to happen. So once the matter gets passed on to FEMA, the community's been notified. What could happen is the community could be put on probation, which we've kind of touched on before, but it's a change in the community status resulting from the violation and deficiencies in the administration and enforcement of the local NFIP management regulations. The probation period lasts until the program deficiencies have been corrected and the violations have been remedied to the maximum extent possible. So again, that doesn't mean in a lot of situations, it doesn't have to be fully compliant. It's the maximum extent that FEMA deems possible to comply with the regulations. And that probation could be extended up to a year after that. On the next slide. So with this probationary period, it comes with an additional charge of $50 added to the premium of each policy for that period of at least 1 year. And again, it's not going to come unless you're formally notified, and it's implemented if the issues are not resolved after multiple attempts from us to fix it. In the instance that the violations are not resolved during that probationary period, if no actions are being taken by the community, at that point, FEMA could potentially put the community on suspension, which would be a removal of the NFIP participating community from the program. This will come, again, there'll be multiple notices of this before it happens, but it comes after a failure to enforce the floodplain management regulations. New flood insurance coverage cannot be purchased, and policies cannot be renewed in a suspended community. So in instances where, so floodplain insurance is required for those who hold federally backed mortgages or loans. So people who have these loans or mortgages, their loan could be removed, or flood insurance could be forced upon them from an outside source, which is typically more expensive and may not have as great as coverage. So on the next slide. So again, no flood insurance available for new or renewed policies, no loans for structures. So no new loans will be given out, which could kind of deter people from moving to the community if they're looking for housing or relocating to that area. And on top of the lack of floodplain insurance available, the community could also have decreased access to disaster assistance through FEMA. So any sort of disaster assistance that you might seek out from FEMA is going to be less available, if not non-existent, if you have proven to not enforce your floodplain regulations. FEMA sees that you have the ability to make your community safer, and you weren't doing that. So they decrease the access for financial assistance in that situation. And then suspension of the community remains until all violations or deficiencies are corrected. So just because you are suspended from the program doesn't mean you're suspended forever. There are actions you can take to fix the issue and be reinstated in the National Flood Insurance Program. So it's not an end-all be-all, but we highly suggest working with us to avoid getting to that point. It makes for unhappy community members when their insurance policies either get removed or increased. So again, overall story is just work with us to prevent getting to that point.
Just to kind of end the presentation, we wanted to discuss the key takeaways from this discussion, and the main things we want you to walk away from this class with. So first things first, we want you to understand how important it is to have a good relationship with your legal counsel before any violations occur. So having this relationship, like we've made mention of, before a violation occurs will ensure that once something does come up, you have that working relationship, you know how to contact them, and it'll just make it easier to work through the violation with your legal counsel. Other key takeaways is obviously be familiar with the enforcement steps in your local ordinances. You know, there are enforcement procedures within the floodplain management regulation or floodplain management ordinance that we have, our state model, but you may have other enforcement procedures in other ordinances. So be sure you're familiar with those as well. And then if possible, we understand that it's not feasible for every community, but if you can have steps in place to regularly survey your special flood hazard area to catch any potential violations before they get too far, we strongly recommend that. You know, if you can catch a potential violation in the beginning stages rather than when it's finished, it'll be an easier remedy than when it's completely constructed. And of course, make your community available or make your community aware of the floodplain regulations. You know, have them understand where your floodplain is in the community, that a permit is required. And you can post this information on your website, in a local paper, other high traffic areas or community buildings. You can send information to them in the mail, whatever works best for conveying information to your community. We would recommend doing that with floodplain management stuff as well. And lastly, know that we are here to help you. We are not an enforcement agency. We can't enforce anything against your community, but we are here to help you work through any violation or enforcement procedures that you have questions on, or any other floodplain management related questions. It doesn't even have to be related to violations and such. If you just have any question related to floodplain, you can reach out to us and we will help you with that.